Namaste. Welcome back or welcome to the Tower Yoga Podcast. I am your loving host, Kellee Williams, and I am very happy to be here today talking about the summer solstice. As we approach the summer solstice, we arrive at a moment that cultures all around the world have honored for thousands of years. Of course, here in the Northern Hemisphere, it's the summer solstice, but there's different seasons happening all at the same time on the globe. So it's often also known as the June solstice. However you want to look at it, though, it is the longest day of the year. It's a day when the sun reaches its greatest expression in the sky. I looked back, and this was 2 years ago, episode 8, if you can believe that or not. I talked about some symbolism and some things inspired about the summer solstice. And so you can, of course, go back and listen to that if you want to. But in that episode, I spoke a little bit on the symbolism of Surya Namaskar, the sun salutation. And I think today I really want to just hone in on that one piece and get into it, dig into it a little bit. There is something about this time of year that I do think invites reflection because we've made it, halfway into the year from, the calendar year, January. We're like at that midpoint. It's kind of that half year mark. And I think it's also a time where checking in on our own evolution and things like that is sort of natural. We notice the abundance around us. Gardens are growing, the days stretch longer, life seems to be moving outward, expressing itself fully. There's this yang, solar energy, like all around. And yet, what I find most interesting about the summer solstice is that it's not simply a celebration of more light, it is a reminder to pay attention to what light reveals. In yoga, one of the practices most closely associated with the sun is, as I said, Surya Namaskar, the sun salutation. And many of us know it as a familiar sequence of postures, 12 to be exact, where one flows into the next, something we practice at the beginning of class, a way to warm the body. It sort of addresses all the major muscle groups in the body. It's easy to link breath with the movement, and it's a nice way to kind of prime us for practice. But beneath the physical movement is a much older and deeper teaching. Traditionally, Surya Namaskar is an offering to Surya, the Vedic sun deity or sun god. Surya is not simply the physical sun overhead. He represents illumination of all sorts, vitality, awareness, and the life giving universal intelligence that animates all things. The sun does not create life by force, it reveals what is already waiting beneath the surface. Seeds germinate because conditions become optimal, they become favorable. Flowers bloom because the environment supports their unfolding. The light reveals what was already present in potential. In many ways, the practice of yoga asks us to consider whether human growth works in the same way, to contemplate that. Perhaps our deepest work is not necessarily progressively becoming something better or new. It might be about creating conditions for something essential to emerge that's there, that's always been there. This is where Surya Namaskar becomes more than a sequence of poses. There's very deep and rich symbolism. It becomes a roadmap of sorts of development, of transformation, a map of what, if you are familiar, Joseph Campbell famously called the hero's journey. Joseph Campbell noticed that stories from cultures all over the world followed a similar character arc or pattern. The hero begins in an ordinary world. Something calls them beyond what is familiar, and they encounter challenges, teachers, they have losses and revelations, and eventually return home transformed. What is extremely fascinating to me is that the hero's journey is not really about adventure, it's about initiation. The person who begins the journey is not the same person who returns, not because they acquired something external, because they discovered that essential piece I was talking about. Yoga philosophy suggests a remarkably similar idea. The goal is not self improvement for just self improvement's sake in a modern sense. The goal is remembrance. It's a return home to oneself. The Sanskrit word yoga comes from the root I-U-J, meaning to yoke or unite or meld or melt or bring together. It points toward a process of reconnecting with what's always been present beneath distraction and conditioning and fear and namification, identification, these things. When viewed through this lens, every round of Surya Namaskar tells the story of separation and return. The sequence, of course, begins in stillness, standing in Tadasana or mountain pose, balanced, present. Nothing's happened yet, but we're like ready. There's potentiality abounds. In mythology, this is representing the ordinary world. In nature, it's the seed before germination. And in spiritual life, it's the moment before awakening begins. Most transformation begins really quietly and below the surface, long before any visible changes occur. We often, as I've talked about in other episodes, imagine growth as a like really dramatic breakthrough, and that can be true, but more often it starts as a subtle feeling that's just like that little nag in the back of your mind that our current way of being can no longer contain who we are becoming, who we are growing into. Then comes the upward reach, the Urdhva Hastasana, where you reach your arms towards the sky. The heart lifts, the gaze rises. Something in us kind of hears that call and responds to possibility. The hero kind of picks up the phone, if you know what I mean. The seed begins to stir. A question emerges, a longing, a curiosity, a desire to know ourselves more deeply. And from there, we move into the deep, dark unknown. Forward folding. Uh, Diving down and in, entering unfamiliar territory. One of the patterns found in almost every mythological tradition is that transformation requires a descent, and a conscious one if you're going to make it out. The hero does not ascend immediately into wisdom. It's not a Disney movie. They descend first, they get brought down to their knees. Their ego has to submit. And in these stories, you'll see the characters go into forests, into caves, into the underworld, in Greek mythology, into essentially uncertainty. Psychologically, we experience the same thing. Growth often begins with a little disorientation, maybe a little confusion, the ending of an identity, the unraveling of certainty, maybe not in the highest sense, but in definitely the surface level of what we feel we know. The recognition that once worked, just it no longer does. We've gone as far as we can go in that one way. This is one reason I find the symbolism of the forward fold so compelling. The head bows, vision narrows, we surrender our upright position. We move closer to the earth. We get humbled. There is humility in that gesture, a willingness to enter the mystery without immediately demanding answers. The middle portion of Surya Namaskar is where the real work begins or the real work happens. I'm talking about strength. I'm talking about effort, about practice. I'm talking about plank pose, talking about, a road of trials, so to say. Not because life is punishing us, but because life is shaping us. It's forging us, and we need heat to be forged. And that's definitely a different thing. The hero's journey is often misunderstood as a series of obstacles to overcome, but many mythologists point out that the challenges themselves are the teachers. The obstacle is the way of it all. The purpose is not necessarily to defeat them, but the purpose is to be transformed by them. The practice of yoga takes a similar approach. The pose is rarely the point. Awareness is the point. What arises while we are in the posture is the point. Patience, sometimes frustration, determination, presence, humility. Every challenge becomes information, feedback. Every challenge becomes practice. And it's that, kind of tropey saying you might have heard me or some other yoga teachers say that it's a practice, not a perfect. Eventually, the sequence brings us to a place of surrender, and it is the point in which we move through the Chaturanga Dandasana. We get very low and we lower to the earth. Something softens, something lets go. In many wisdom traditions, surrender is not viewed as weakness, it is viewed as like deep maturity in a way that it marks the moment when we stop trying to force life to conform to our expectations, our timeline, our narrative, and begin participating in reality as it is, the best we can through our own unique lens. There's a profound difference between giving up and letting go. And maybe that's something that we could get lost in semantics with, but I hope you know what I mean. And I mean, I can help you if you don't explain more of what I mean. Giving up is something that is more contracting, where we sort of shrivel into ourselves and get smaller. Letting go actually creates space. So with letting go, it might feel, even in that way, like there is some feeling of defeat there, but at the core, there's usually some little tiny smidget of relief, and that relief is truth. And often it's only in that space that genuine insight can really emerge. From this surrender comes cobra pose, bhujangasana, and the heart rises. The chest opens, awareness expands. It's like we almost need to brought to such a humble place in order to not be so hard and to actually be soft enough to allow ourselves to go beyond the limitations of whatever it was before that we were held back by. You can notice that awakening does not occur at the beginning of the journey. It emerges after humility, after effort, after uncertainty, after surrender. This pattern appears everywhere in mythology. And even I was joking around with a friend recently who she was talking about going through, being on the heels of a potential midlife crisis. And we sort of were talking about this reframe of maybe it's not a midlife crisis, maybe it's a midlife awakening. And I really pull that a character arc that I've studied, that I've absorbed time and time again through mythology and through art and through, different philosophies and in my own life in these small ways that sometimes those moments where you feel like, oh my God, I thought I knew my path. I thought I knew how things were going. And then all of a sudden there's like a bunch of things up in the air and on the table. And yeah, it's at that point where you're, ready to dissolve what you were and become what you're meant to be. It's like there's another episode, and I don't know it off the top of my head, but I talked about the symbolism of the caterpillar. The caterpillar dissolves before becoming the butterfly. And, I bet you that's deeply, I mean, it's nature doing its thing, but I bet you it's like deeply confusing. I don't know if a caterpillar can get confused, but yeah, I bet it's deeply disorienting for the caterpillar who was just munching on lettuce, crawling around, and then all of a sudden to be turning into like a big goo hanging sack cocoon thing into like eventually coming out and being a butterfly and having these beautiful wings that you don't even know how to use, but then you know how to use. So yeah, it's we see this pattern to get me back on track everywhere in nature like that. Winter gives way to spring, seeds split open before they sprout. Transformation often requires a period of dissolution. Something must loosen before something new can emerge. And then, perhaps most importantly, we return back through the sequence, back to standing, back to where we began. After down dog, we make our way back. So this may be the most overlooked part of both the hero's journey and in the yoga practice, the asana practice. The point is not to, and beyond asana, but asana and all the other limbs of yoga. The point is not necessarily to escape ordinary life. The point is to return to it with more clarity if you didn't have it before. The hero comes home, the practitioner steps off of the mat, goes back out into the world. The point of asana isn't necessarily to go escape your life for an hour on your mat and then go back the same way, you left it. It's to show up with more presence. The wisdom brought into relationship, work, community, family, your like day-to-day choices. Hopefully any wisdom that you absorbed through the practice, you're able to integrate in these real ways in your real life. The journey becomes meaningful, specifically through integration. As we arrive at the summer solstice, I find myself reflecting on this idea. The sun reaches its highest point in the sky, yet from that moment, the days will gradually begin to shorten. Nature reminds us that every cycle contains its opposite for balance. Expansion eventually gives way to contraction. Expression eventually gives way to reflection. The solstice is not the end of a journey, it's a turning point within a much larger cycle. And that is one of the deepest teachings hidden within Surya Namaskar. The goal is not to remain at the peak. The goal is to participate consciously in the cycle, to trust the unfolding, to honor the ascent and the descent, to recognize that growth, surrender, awakening, and return are not separate stages of life. They're all part of one whole. They are movements that continue to repeat themselves again and again, like the rising and setting of the sun, like the changing of seasons, like the breath, like every round of Surya Namaskar. And with each cycle, we are offered another opportunity to remember that the light has been present within us all along. Thank you so much for going on this summer solstice inspired journey with me. I hope that this can give you something to take into your next practice. And who knows, maybe you might do a few rounds of Surya Namaskar on the summer solstice. Thank you so much for listening. Bye bye.